I've done a few videos on this channel where I looked at this idea of convergence devices and counterpart devices. So that's the idea that a new piece of technology claiming to replace multiple separate bits of technology could be better, or actually, interestingly in some cases, not as good as those original counterpart devices. Some examples of this idea are, for example, the iPhone replaces a camera and a normal phone. And another one might be a multi-tool like a Leatherman replacing individual tools. And then there's things like zoom lenses that replace prime lenses for cameras. And I like thinking about a Tesla as a convergence device as well, because for me it replaces so many different kinds of cars. It literally replaced the idea of me having a separate sports car and a slow family car. The ideas I've looked at on this channel are where I've drawn that line, and that's a good example of why this is a very subjective thing, and that point at which a convergence device could replace counterpart devices varies from person to person. I found that it's always really interesting to have this kind of discussion though, because it helps with your decision making process. It's always especially interesting when we get a new device that's released that actually looks like it's going to be one of these convergence devices, and you can start to weigh it up and see, is it likely to actually replace individual things. For me, the Tesla Model 3 and Y was a really good example of that. Now, I think the Apple Watch Ultra is another really good example of this in a way that the normal Apple Watch just isn't. If we consider the world before the Apple Watch, we can kind of come up with these groups of watches. So we've got the original Apple Watch, which is a smartwatch and arguably the very best of those smartwatches with all the software stuff that Apple throw into it. And then we've got the dedicated fitness trackers, which are kind of at the top of their game for that specific thing. And then there's the category of dive watches, which obviously includes a whole range of different watches at very, very different prices, but essentially the idea based on them being waterproof to a very great depth. But they've got this sort of fashion element to them as well, and the style of them and all of that is associated with that kind of a group of watches. And then I think we should talk about Casio watches, because they have such a distinctive look to them and a very cult following across all of the range. But in particular, I'm kind of interested in the really rugged G-Shock type ones and the older trekking watches, which seem to have kind of morphed into the G-Shock brand now. They're all very separate devices, and people will choose the kind of watch that they want that most appeals to them, but that's the important bit, they have to choose. But then along comes the Apple Watch Ultra. It's a device that has GPS accuracy and battery life that's good enough for serious fitness tracking. It's genuinely tough. They tested it to a military specification for how durable it's going to be. It's got the sapphire glass and titanium case and all the rest of it. And it's so waterproof it can dive to 40 meters. And of course it's got all of the smartwatch stuff that Apple have done so well in the original Apple Watch. They've sold 100 million of these things. Things like music and the fact you can call and message on it, and all of those little small things that add up throughout the day that are really based on small convenience interactions, but make it such a meaningfully useful thing to have on your wrist. And this is the interesting one. It's actually got that design aesthetic sense of appeal to it that speaks to all the ruggedness and all the things it claims to do. And that's kind of similar to the way that the dive watches have got that associated style with them. That's what people find so appealing. I think this combination makes the Apple Watch Ultra much more significant than it first looks. I think it's got the ingredients to be quite a disruptor. I think it will actually take sales away from dive watches, the original Apple Watch, dedicated fitness trackers, and of course all the Casio G-Shock stuff. All of those kind of individual segments. People looking at any of those kind of watches are going to find something really appealing in the Apple Watch Ultra, and crucially in a way where they don't have to make any compromises. The fact that watch design across the industry is all heavily influenced by this aspirational idea. People choose them for the style of them, and they choose them because they feel it represents who they are. People wear watches like clothes. They sort of feel they should reflect something about them. Apple have tried really hard to tap into this with the watch bands, all the different colors and the different materials for the watch itself, to try and tap into that unique sense of personalization, which is so important when you're choosing a watch. But actually, that smooth pebble look for the old Apple Watch really doesn't have any ruggedness. It doesn't resonate with anyone who is looking for ruggedness as one of those values they want their watch to reflect. Apple used the custom watch face idea to try and tap into that personalization element as well. The Wayfarer face that's exclusive to the Ultra, I think, is their best attempt at using the face design to kind of convey a sense of personalization and resonance with certain types of people. The whole thing just really taps into this adventurer kind of aesthetic. For many people, of course, like all of these discussions, it's not going to be enough to replace the individual counterpart devices. It's just that the Ultra has moved the bar so much that way more people now will look at the Ultra instead of looking at individual devices. And it finally has that more utilitarian design that so many people want from a watch. If you enjoyed this kind of tech philosophy geeky discussion, there's plenty more of this kind of thing on the channel, so do have a look around and subscribe, like this video and share it and all the rest of it. That's super appreciated. If you play this video next, you can join me as I discuss the idea of whether a Leatherman can replace individual tools or not for everyday pocket carry, which is an interesting one, and I'll see you there.